one of the keys to a successful business is understanding your ideal client, right?
Mm-hmm.
You market to the ideal client. You make sure that that ideal client fits the scope of work that you want to do, and then it's a good marriage.
Yeah.
And then as you work through that ideal client, well, now it's someone that's going to invest and understand the value we bring as a contractor, because we're not the cheapest, we're not the most expensive, but there's value there, you know, by hiring you.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the NS Podcast. This week, I'm joined by Brad from AFT Construction. What are you doing in Boston? Besides freezing your nuts up.
I am freezing. It's cold here, man. I was texting Nick last night. I don't think I was prepared for how cold it was, just walking out to find a good place to eat.
You got in my truck with 2 jackets.
I did. I have my jacket here. I brought just in case I get cold here in the warehouse, and I got my big snow jacket out there, but, you know, haven't needed it yet, so that's good.
So you're in town. We're walking some job sites, showing you what we got going on, talking about some projects in the future. But we were just sitting in my office, and you said, let's talk about I'm going to get this wrong, delivering a house toothbrush ready?
Yeah, toothbrush ready.
What does that mean?
Well, I guess before we get there, I had to investigate because, you know, Nick, you and I have been friends for, I don't know, 5 years on Instagram. And, you know, we speak at all the conferences, and part of it's like, let's see if Nick's the real deal. No, that's not why I'm here, but...
well, I mean, it slightly is. It slightly is. Like, I feel, and I mean, that's why we travel to each other's places of business and get to see the projects, because it's not that I'm not the real deal per se, but it's always like, is it truly what you see on social media? Well,
and I think more than that, I mean, the reality is the reason a lot of us are active on social media, and this goes back to Toothbrush Ready, is we're trying to perfect an imperfect business, right? Mm-hmm. Construction is a really difficult industry. There is something to be said with the camaraderie that we build. Just, you know, there's a lot of pitfalls and ups and downs we deal with as entrepreneurs, as builders. But more importantly, as you start looking about the structure of a company, how do you get a house toothbrush ready, right? And the only way to do that, I've found, as we get into what that means, is we're a much better builder today than we were last year, than we were 2 years ago. And you know, this is something you and I talk about a lot. And the only way to do that is to really understand, well, how does Nick run his business in Boston? How does Andrew Patterson run his in Newport Beach? And as we work with these other builders around the country to understand, you know, the things they're doing, how are they working with their team? How are they working with manufacturers? How are they understanding new technology? You know, today you're going to be training on passive houses. You know, net zero, where's the industry going? How do we get there? And so really that's why I find value in these meetings and visiting contractors, because I get to see the types of product, like you're using TrueFig, right? And the project we walked this morning, and I was just at their showroom in California last month. And so there's a lot of value, right? And then how do we implement that? And really the whole part of this conversation is you start thinking Toothbrush Ready. That's the goal, that our client should be able to, in an imperfect market, move in with their toothbrush and they're ready to go, right?
Like a hotel room.
Like a hotel room, which means the house is
For the record, I never bring a toothbrush to a hotel. I always get the free one.
Do you really?
I always get the free one at the front. I don't know why. I just go down to the front desk and ask. And that hotel that we stayed at a couple weeks ago in Hershey. It was $9.
That's hilarious. They actually charged you?
Yes. They're like, oh, we don't have them behind the front desk, but you can grab them at the shop over here. And I walked in. She was $9. I was like, for this?
Yeah, for this little crappy toothbrush.
So I end up, it's actually still in my backpack, all in a bag. I was like, no more free toothbrush.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have. You always need some backup toothbrushes, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
Business meeting, just had lunch or something. But yeah, but, you know, when you think about that, I mean, for the homes that we're doing, you know, that's one of our sales pitches, right? It's going to be fully furnished, pool's done, landscape's done. Being in Phoenix, it's a hot market. Everyone has a pool. And so the ideal is you want to create this resort, right, and toothbrush ready. And so how do you get there, and how do you walk the client who comes in and makes that phone call? Hey, Nick, I want NS Builders to build my house. Well, what is that transition as you start thinking of time frame, budget, you know, expectation? Really where we get in trouble as contractors, where I've been in trouble in my career, is not laying out the proper expectations. And when we let those expectations down or we miscommunicate those, that's when we had the most issue.
Yeah. The mentality, have you always brought it to completely furnished in your projects?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, as I look back early in our career, I think we did to some extent, I mean, for the most part, we always worked with designers, and typically when a designer's involved, they're going to do some sort of furniture package.
Yep.
Now some clients are going to have their own furnishings. They may have some important
pieces,
pieces, artifacts, whatever it may be, from like historical stuff that family that's been handed down, maybe a china cabinet or something, or a dining table. But for the most part, all of our clients have.
Yeah.
And so furnishing is key. I mean, as you start thinking about where you want your company to be, I've always wanted clients that want to furnish it, because it's one thing. Early on in my career, there were some projects we did that were not furnished. And what's tough about that is you do this amazing house, you have this amazing quality, and then the furniture does not match the aesthetic. It doesn't match what you built.
Yeah.
And so when you go to photograph it or you go to market it, like it doesn't jive, it doesn't work. And so when you have a client, and this goes back to one of the keys to a successful business, is understanding your ideal client, right? You market to the ideal client, you make sure that ideal client fits the scope of work that you want to do, and then it's a good marriage. Yeah. And then as you work through that ideal client, well, now it's someone that's going to invest and understand the value we bring as a contractor, because we're not the cheapest, we're not the most expensive, but there's value there,
right,
by hiring us.
I would say that we've truly done only one that has been brought to Toothbrush ready. And maybe even beyond that, because I'm pretty sure we bought a toothbrush for this project. But everything was down to the towels, all the sheets were replaced, the silverware was replaced, the plates. It was, a bachelor pad. He wanted to basically leave and come back and have everything replaced, including the renovation, in which we did. And it was really, I think, exactly what you're saying is like the value is behind the fact that it is a cohesive thought. It's one continuous thought all the way through from, design through construction through furnishing, where the disconnect oftentimes does happen when you get through construction and then the client is left on their own to design. Now, there's no doubt that we're speaking to obviously a specific market that can handle this, but typically we're building, you and I are building for those clients that value what we do and value the sense of, bringing it to a level of, cohesive furnishing. And go ahead.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, I mean, as you start thinking about the ideal client, I mean, the goal is, part of the frustration when you go back to the expectation of the client is that they feel that, the home building experience, like it'll ruin their marriage, right? So you're saving marriages one house at a time, right? That's another one of our little sayings. I mean, the thing is, they should be able to hire a professional that's going to take this to Toothbrush ready, where they can focus on their career, they can focus on travel, their family, their business. I mean, whatever it is that has made them successful. And to do that, we really have to understand every little item that goes into that house, and how do we get to that final step. And this is why, I speak so much about pre-construction, and we've made so much of a push, because you and I talked about this today. When you've done projects and you don't have all the consultants there, maybe the homeowner, as good as they are and as good of taste they have, they're not giving you CAD drawings for the design, even though they know what they want. But by having a true designer, a true interior designer, a true architect, a landscape architect, right? A lighting architect, which in some cases we have. When you get these consultants together and people understand the business and they understand what you and I need to build from and how to map this house, we spend that time. There's the heavy lifting in those first 8 to 12 months. Most of my projects are 12 months till we break ground. It doesn't mean the client can't make changes, but now that process is so more streamlined, where during the build, they can just enjoy it now. They can see it go vertical. They can watch it on Instagram. They can watch it on YouTube. They can enjoy the experience, and they may say, hey, house is framed. This bedroom's too small. This living room needs to be opened up. Well, that's okay. It's easy to move and make changes at that point, because we already have a template. I mean, what other business I can't think of any other business, whether you're in car manufacturing, any warehouse, I mean, any business that's making product, when are they ever not understanding what they're making, and when do they not have the product line figured out? And you think about it this way. What's tough about construction is that if I'm going to buy a television or I'm going to buy a Mercedes, right? I never step on the manufacturing floor. I don't see how this is made. I'm getting the end product. What's really tough is the construction. You're taking the manufacturer floor here. In the case of remodel, clients sitting here watching manufacturing in their house, right? On a new build, the same thing. They come by anytime. So you're bringing all this stuff to a temporary location, and it's a very difficult thing to maneuver. And expectations get thrown out of whack really quickly if you haven't pre-planned properly.
And before I get to my point, another thing that's tough with construction is material delivery. So just really quickly, this podcast is brought to you by Rental Run. I know, Brad, you don't have Rental Run in your market yet. I don't know. I was going to say I can't share if it's going there. I have no idea. But Rental Run's actually a service that we signed up for recently. We've been utilizing here in Boston. They're in Philly. They're in Chicago. But essentially, and I'm sure you're with it, where it's your guy needs something at the lumber supply store, the hardware store, wherever it is, and they're leaving the job, going there, purchasing
Wasting
it.
time.
It's 2 hours minimum. By the time they put their tool bag down or their computer down or whatever it is and go there, pick it out, pay for it, get back in their truck, get back to work, and then the ramp back up into the job site mentality, it's just wasted time. So Rent-A-Run has really solved that for us, where we can be on our phone or on the computer, place that order, and oftentimes it's showing up within 2 hours. I know you don't drink coffee. They may be able to slip a Diet Coke in there for you, but they also bring the fresh coffee. So if you guys are interested in learning more about Rent-A-Run, podcast .rentarun/NS. But going back, like the difficulty, in construction, like you're saying, this manufacturing plant, like imagine watching a TV being made, and we would probably have a much different understanding of what we're paying for, where it's like, wait, that's all it is? Or why am I paying so much money? I just watched the guy put it together in 17 minutes.
Yep.
And, we're in this, it's unique to construction. It's unique to home building. And you're seeing all of the bits and pieces that go into it. Well, you think you're seeing all the bits and pieces that go into it, but your point about pre-construction, it's something that we preach, constantly with our clients, with, our vendors, is that the only way to get to this toothbrush ready, product is to spend the time in planning, to spend the time in pre-construction, to do it in a, efficient way, but also in an enjoyable way. The whole marriage, thought of like ruining marriages over a renovation. It's like, I think about my wife and I. It's like we've only renovated one home together, and through that whole process, we never agreed on anything. To an extent, like we agreed on some things, but most of the time we had very different opinions. And I think back, and we're going into another remodel, and we're taking a much different approach. We're working with a professional architect. Like, we're going to go through the process just like a client would. Because looking back, I realized that it wasn't that we necessarily disagreed with each other. It was that we were both too fixed on what we envisioned, that there was no, let's figure out how we can work with both of those scenarios. Because, we're both very stubborn individuals, by ourselves. And when, I say blue and she says red, we don't think we could do purple. We're just like, no, it's blue, it's red. And, it's the same thing with these relationships and our clients. It's like, we don't want that process to be overwhelmingly stressful, because, I think our industry is flooded with, homeowners that get so worn down by the process in which construction takes that by the end of it, they don't care. They've lost interest in the job. They just want you out of their house. They just want the renovation done. You did a crap job, but they're so worn down that now not only did you do a crap job and they're frustrated and they just want the job done, but that doesn't go anywhere. That contractor moves on to the next one, and that's never chirped around like, yeah, it was a painful process. It almost goes unknown because they're so worn down. And you and I look at pre-construction and the client relationship as such an integral part of our business that we want. I'm sure you're touching base with your clients just as I am, is talking to them, how's things going? Is it like, you walked the job with me today, and, I chatted with that client. First thing I asked is, how are things going? He just moved in, wanted to understand like what his initial thoughts were. And then on my way out, I'm like, let's schedule a time, just one-on-one, you and I, let's, catch up.
And I love that you do that. I mean, the audit is really key, because as you look at your business, it's one thing. We all think we're operating our business a certain way. We all think that everyone who's working for us has the same exact mentality and communication process and as you and I are running it. But the reality is it differs, right? There's a lot of every personality is different. And so by sitting down with the client and getting that audit, the autopsy, if you will, they say, hey, Nick, this was great, but you need to work on this. And so I found that valuable, where if you can let the pride aside and understand the feedback from the client, it's super valuable, because it's just going to give you another opportunity to better your business. And a client that's willing to do that is someone that actually believes in you, right? I mean, they care enough to say, hey, this is what I appreciated, this is what I didn't like, this is what I think you can fix. But going back to the planning side, as you talk about with your wife, I mean, the reality is very common, like with spouses or partners or whatever it may be in the building process, is that we have different views. And so having a therapist, right? There's a reason there's a therapist, a middle person, and architects, designers, us builders, we're therapists, part of our day. But that team approach, there's other ways to look at it where they can achieve the same look that you and your wife want.
Right.
But there's another way to do that. And by planning that up front, just as with any business, I mean, where clients really get frustrated, and you see this a lot in the remodel stage too, is it's this continual, okay, I need this stain color, I need this paint color, I need this grout selection. And so this, there's, and at this point, they're excited when the demo happens, but then as it takes longer, they're ready for you to get out of their house. They want their house back. And so this process it goes through these waves. And so the more that you can plan in pre-construction and say, look, here's the timeline. When we break ground, we're off to the races. Yeah, you can make some changes, but now if I have everything decided, I can go to my pool plan meeting. This is where I bring in all my subcontractors, and we sit here and we have every trade, and they commit to manpower, they commit to durations, and now I can hold them accountable. I can build the schedule. So these things are really key, because now it allows me to build more efficiently, which now is going to affect my bottom line. It's going to affect the bottom line of the client, and hopefully salvage that relationship when it's done.
Yeah, I think, it's oftentimes pre-construction is centered around, like, is this buildable? What's this going to cost? And then there's usually this rough timeline, but, it is a great opportunity of time to work, to dive into the schedule and set expectations, and I think that is something that, anyone I talk to, from a client perspective, I want to go back to your point about the audit at the end, because recently I heard something, and I wish I remembered where I heard it, but it, rather than asking clients like, hey, what did you enjoy, or what did you struggle with, you flip it, because what happens there, and this is something I learned, it was recently, I can't remember where I heard it, but when you ask them, like, what could we have done better, right? That's typically what we would ask. They immediately go into, all right, what were the negative things about this project that I wish they could have done better? And the way that they had kind of walked through a better way of proposing that is, hey, do you have any advice for us as a builder? Or, like, going forward, like, I'm always looking to improve my business. Like, come in with a very positive side. Like, what things, what advice would you give me? And, I want to be a better builder. And you're putting positivity in their mind. And oftentimes they'll ignore, like, oh, you guys really sucked at X, Y, Z. Instead, they would say, no, you guys were really great at this. I think that if you focused on, this, your experience would even be heightened even more. And you don't want to, basically, you want to try to prevent pulling your client back into all the negative that they've already been through and quote unquote survive, and really just talk about the positive and how that experience could have been even more positive. But I just lost my train of thought.
No, but what's valuable by asking their advice on how the process was, or what advice would they give to you, Nick, as builders. And I look back, and what's interesting is without asking that question, and I had never thought about doing an audit, but early on in my career, one of the first projects we did, and at this time I was in the field. I was superintendent, right? That's what you do when you start your company. So I was still in the field. So this is a project I was running as a remodel. And the client I was working for, they were great. She worked in the retail business. He formerly was in construction. They're retired now, and they're in Phoenix. And he said, hey, Brad, can we do lunch, if the project's done? And, so I'm all sure we'd go do lunch. And this was him initiating it, right? Because he's like, at lunch, he's like, hey, Brad, I really believe in you. Your personality and, like, your drive. I see where you're going.
But there's a but coming.
And he said, but there's one thing that I can give you some advice on. And that's what he said. I have some advice. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, the end product was great, but the site cleanliness was really bad. Like when the guys are in my driveway, it's a remodel, like they're, they have the saws out there, they're leaving sawdust, there's paint drips. Just some little things, and, debris, maybe some trash, maybe a water bottle in there. And he said it goes a really long way, to keep that site clean, to show that you really care, right? And it was phenomenal advice. And from there, we went into the site cleanliness mode, and this has been a big part of our brand. And there's a lot of clients that have hired us because of site cleanliness. Because like if you care about how clean the site is and about keeping it kept and organized, it's safer, it's more efficient. We feel like you value our investment, right? And so that's to your point, right? That had he not done that on his own, I mean, that wasn't from me. He initiated that. But that's where we can find values of contract. Say, hey, what advice would you have? Because now it puts them in a position where it's both of you trying to build something better, right? Even though they're a client that's done, but who knows? They may call you back and build again because they give you this advice and they show they see that you care. Because most people, if they know that you care, it lets their guard down for sure.
Yeah, and and that process has to start from the beginning. Like it has to be that level of care all the way from the beginning to the end. I'm going to keep using the toothbrush mentality, but like to deliver a product all the way to that level, they're putting a lot of trust in the process, and communicating that process as early as the sales process, pre-construction, construction, like that has to be maintained. And I think like you think about as when you started a company as a super, right? You're in the field. You're not a super anymore. You're not in the field anymore, and that further kind of has to, like, your focus has to be on your team, and your focus has to be on what the deliverables are for each of these people that are involved, from the site supers, the PMs, the coordinators, the guy that's doing the warranty calls. Like all of that has to be completely cohesive, and that communication has to be start from the beginning all the way to delivery and be the same throughout.
So let me ask you this, Nick. So if I'm client, being that I'm calling you for the first time, never built a house, and I'm saying, okay, Nick, I want you to build my house ground up. Like, what does that mean? What's my timeline? What's the expectation you give to me? What's the process to get to permit? Mm-hmm. And then you don't have to give me the construction schedule, but hey, here's the timeline to build.
Yeah, and that's you're
I'm asking you.
Yeah,
I'm your client. Hey, Nick, this is my phone call. This is a lead generation.
So we're gonna communicate. I would say that for me, I'm gonna try to get a little bit more information out of this first. But they're looking to build ground up. Then
so
yes.
Let's just say, hey, Nick, I'm building a 5,000 square foot house.
Yeah,
my budget's $8 million. I got plenty per square foot.
I'm gonna flip the script, and I usually ask, like, when are you looking? When would you like to live there? Like, when's the end date? Everyone wants to start construction immediately, but I typically will catch them off guard and say, when are you looking to move in? What's your goal?
I really am not pressured by a timeline. I just curious.
Totally
on the
understood.
process.
So for us, we're going to want to take the next 6 to 12 months to work through pre-construction, and that's going to include, do you already have a designer? Do you already have an architect? If you
I need an architect. I need a designer.
So we're going to make, what we would do is we'd make a couple introductions. We'd love to be, involved. If we're the builder of choice, then we'll get some sort of pre-construction agreement put in place. We'll make some introductions to some architects. We want to be involved in that process. So it's not a handoff by any means. It's hey, here's an architect that we think would be a great fit. We'll be part of that interview process, help you make the decision, and then once we have that team solidified, we want to budget anywhere from 6 to 12 months. I love the fact that you're basically going 12 months. I think for me,
I don't know how you do it in 6.
Agreed.
And part of that too, I mean, just being realistic, I'm in Scottsdale. I mean, I can't get a permit. If I submit for permit, it'll be 4 months. So
it depends on the project. I guess you're specific with a 5,000 square foot build. I'm thinking a renovation we can typically get off the ground.
Yeah,
sooner
renovation
than that.
Permit.
But new build,
quicker than 4 months.
Yeah, new build. It's typically it is closer to a year. And we want to set like you said, we want to set those expectations up front. If we're, and frankly, I'm saying this out loud, realizing that I do communicate 6 to 12, and realize I probably should just be communicating 12. So if anyone's
Don't say
calling,
6, because here's what happens. I mean,
they hear 6.
And it's so whenever you give those
numbers, you could do 12 to 6. One. Well, if you
do 12 to 16 months, and then they only hear 12, and they're all, why are we at 14 months?
True.
But
no, it's a fair point, and I think that as we adapt internally, like our business is constantly going through change and constantly looking, and constantly improving. And if we were to sit down and audit, which we do not, I wouldn't say not not as much as we would like to every single job, but being able to reflect back, yes, there's jobs that we've been able to start immediately. There's jobs that we jump into, within a few weeks. Even this new build, we had a client call. They wanted to get demo done immediate, and then they were going to hit the pause button, do design, and then come back and build the house. So like for me, like, okay, that's something that we started within a few months, but if we peel that back and realize, well, no, construction didn't really start for a year. And, I think that is something that we need to be more realistic with, as far as like, let's set the expectation that it's a year from the time that we begin our conversation to the time that we start construction. Obviously, it can fluctuate in either direction. There's way too many things that can, vary.
Impact it.
Yeah.
And then it just puts you in a bad spot, because if you're saying 6 to 12 and ends up taking 9, now they're already frustrated.
Right.
Before you start, and now you're going to be carrying the heavy lifting. So the thing is, it comes down to expectation. If you go back, look at your audits, all this database of all the homes you've done, it's taken more like 12. Yeah, give or take 12. And it's really going to depend on you, Nick, on how quick you make decisions. I mean, that can fluctuate, and we'll update you regularly.
Right.
But, that little softer landing, I mean, so with you, tell me, if I call you and say, okay, Nick, 12 months, well, why does it take so long? Like, what are the stages of those 12 months? And maybe I'll answer it how we do it, which is probably similar to you. Whenever you're doing a ground up, as I sit down with the client and they want to understand the timeline, I make them, we map this out together, right? So we talk about, okay, in a perfect scenario, you have your lot. So we know your lot. We know the HOA, like in Scottsdale, we have a lot of HOA, CCNRs, right? These are restrictions that we have to build to. There's requirements, right? And so based on the community, we've done our research. We know it's going to require, we know the style that they want. So let's say in a perfect world, we have the architect, we have the designer, we have the landscape architect, and myself. There's kind of 4 entities there. And we're going to drive that process. But really, we tell them, okay, depending on how quick you make decisions, you're going to go back and take this questionnaire, right? And we're going to understand, how do you live? What is the aging in place? How old are your kids? Like understanding how they live, so we know how to create the floor plan. And it typically takes about 8 weeks, right? So we're like, okay, the first 8 weeks, we're going to figure out.
You're working with an architect at that point.
We're working with an architect.
Yeah, right.
So you have our architect and designers involved too.
Sure.
So architect, designer, and myself, we're working together with the client and their questionnaire that they filled out. And we say, you're about 8 weeks until we have a floor plan. Now, once we have the floor plan and we're good, we signed on that. Not that they can't change, but once we have this figured out, now we can go vertical. Mm-hmm. So what that means is we're going to create our ceiling heights, in all the rooms. Are we going 16 feet in the great room, 14 feet in the master, 12 in the guest rooms, whatever. So we get our ceiling heights. We figure out what the curb appeal, the elevation will look like. That's when the designer's involved. Now we're picking, stone, brick, concrete, whatever the exterior finish, stucco. And so we're looking at this house, which takes another about 4 weeks. So about 3 months in a perfect world, if you make decisions quickly at 3 months, we're going to know what your house is going to look like.
Right.
We're going to know what it's going to look like from the street and then floor plan. And then we go 2 different angles. Now's the heavy lifting, right? So as you start thinking about this year process at 3 months, from 3 to about 8 months. So for those 5 months now, our architect is going to kind of go his direction with his consultants, and he's going to start doing structural, mechanical, civil, all of that. Our designer now is going to start making every selection, right? Our design book, our big design book that has all the elevations and appliances. And so this is where you're going to be going to the designer's place, and we're going to be picking all the tile, everything. I mean, everything that goes in this house. And there's going to be collaboration, because lighting, architecture, and landscape, and pool, and I mean, all this stuff is happening. Right. So the goal is that in 8 months from today, that we know everything that's going in your house. Yeah. So that's going to allow a lot of not guarantees, but it's going to allow a lot of control with pricing. It'll allow a tighter schedule, and then that gets submitted for permit. So when that gets submitted for permit, although we've had a budget, although we have an idea.
So you're not submitting for permit until you're completely.
We don't submit for permit till we're done.
Yeah.
So we have all the interior selected, exterior selected, and the design. We're
typically taking advantage of that, like getting the drawings to a point that they're permit submittable.
Does it give you an advantage? And let me just say it this way, and this is just another way to think about it. And my way's not perfect, so
no, I understand.
You can pick me apart. But the reason I do it this way is what I found is at 8 months now, when they submit for permit, and I have both books. I have my architectural CDs, and I have my design book. This is my doctrine, right? I send it out one time for bid. It's going to give me the best bid, and it's complete. So I don't have to. When I send it out, my electrician knows all the finishes. He knows if there's
Yep.
plug mold, if there's true fig,
So up until
whatever
this point,
may be.
you're using historic data.
I'm his historical data, and
Yep.
there may be a couple sensors that I do, like with
Right.
finishes. I have a good pulse of what tile's going to be, backsplashes,
Sure.
cabinetry. I mean, that's pretty easy. What's tough is the structural component. We
Right.
don't have structural drawings, so I have to get a good idea. We're going to have this many retaining walls.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of have an idea if it's hillside.
Yeah, so you'll throw
So
that
I'll throw it
out.
out to a couple concrete guys, and they're like, hey, you're probably looking $400,000 for concrete.
Right.
So I have some pulses to say, okay, are we pretty close on our budget?
Mm-hmm.
But then when it comes time to bid, like I only want to send on the street one time.
Right.
Because then give me the best price. And so what happens is when that permit goes into the city, it's going to take the city 45 days to 60 days to get that first review back.
Right.
Right. And
So
there will be red lines.
You're doing something similar, just at a different time. in the submission.
But by setting that expectation, what
Right.
ends up happening is at 8 months, when I send this out for bid, I have 6 weeks to get a bid, which gives me substantial time where I take a week now. I tell them, hey, that first week, we're writing all the scope. We're going through the design book. We're making sure we know every piece of iron
Right.
or metal or cladding or whatever's going in this house, chimney shroud, whatever it may be. So we identify it on scope. We send this out for bid. It takes about 4 weeks for our subs to bid it. They send it back, and now I have a week to put these bids together.
Right.
So at 6 weeks, I can go to you, Nick, and say, okay, we're very confident in this price we're giving you, and here's all of our bids. It's all
Yep.
cost plus. We get the revisions back. There'll be some red lines, so we'll send those back out. And now at this point with the red lines, it's only going to impact maybe 6 or 7 of the trades. And so they'll update those numbers accordingly. Goes back in. And then at that point, the client has, okay, we're good on the price. It's $1 million. We're good to go. Let's lock in our construction loan or paying cash. We set up all the financing so that when permits release, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
Or VE, right? Which right now we're having to do a lot. And this is where it's a little heavy lifting because pricing is higher, materials higher, rebar goes up, whatever it may be. And so there is some times where we may have to make some changes, but we have that window there while it's in for permit
Right.
to make these VE changes. And so that way, ideally, when the permit's released, we have everything done. We have the design book, we have the structural drawings, we have the bid complete, they're signed off. We take our deposit, and now we're off to the races. And they may make changes like they change. I mean, even with these projects, they still may have 30 change orders of changes that they've added or deleted. But that's okay because this is what has made it more successful for us to get the house toothbrush ready.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, again, like just to kind of recap, I think that the entire process, and one process that I think that our industry skips, is spending that time in pre-construction. I'm sitting here communicating 6 to 12 months, knowing it's 12 months. You're sitting here communicating why it's 12 months, and you're doing a great job explaining that. But just walking, don't mind the leaf blowers, guys. It's leaf season over here. But
Surprised the leaves aren't frozen. It's like
they might be frozen.
Throw them at each other.
Yeah, they chop them up.
Like
but
boomerangs.
That is the pre-construction process is so enormously important. It's something that you preach. It's what I preach. It's looking at every job that we've ever done or we're currently doing, and realizing how much time really goes into this. But also, it really does set the project up for success. And I want to add a caveat to that. What that might mean is that the project might not be a good fit for us.
Exactly. And if I
this is
interrupt
a
you,
great, yeah.
But here's why too, because real quick before I get to that point is when I talk about the HOA, like it's 12 months in a perfect scenario, but where I have really strict HOAs in some, keep in mind when at 3 months, we have to submit for HOA approval to approve the exterior and everything. So that adds another 60 days. So on a case like that, I'm gonna say it's 14 months, right? So I kind of know the HOA, but going back to your point, this is where it's crucial. When a client calls me and you're thinking about the vetting process, Brad, what's it going to take to build a house? And I'm like, well, depending on what you want, you're 3 years. If we start today, you're 3 years, right? And on a complicated hillside build that it's 12 months of pre-construction, 24 months to build, but by setting that realistic expectation, I know I could build a house in 3 years, right? Sure. I mean, most of us better be able to.
Right.
But, ideally it's going to be quicker, but at least they understand they're not coming in thinking it's 14 months.
Right.
Because you have to do is planning. And so the people that understand, if you set these expectations of where it's going to be, those are the right people. And some people are like, no, so-and-so are going to do it in 16 months. Go ahead.
Right.
Go to them, and then they call me, and they're like, hey, we're 16 months in, and we're still at least 8 months away.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But, the people that are on board that say, okay, I understand, I trust you, that's why I'm hiring you, Nick.
Yeah, and that hopefully you get to that answer sooner than later, but that pre-construction process helps you vet out and even just getting to a point where maybe the project, you're just not able to hit the budget. you end up not being able to hit their schedule or their needs. Like, that process is driven to make sure that this project is a success. The whole point of pre-construction is to figure out the constructability, the budget, and the schedule. And you go into that with some level of expectations by setting them with the client, but then further defining them. And when they become, misaligned with builder and homeowner, that's a point where the conversation has to be, are we continuing this or are we not? And, doing that in pre-construction is far easier than doing that in construction. And, again, to just kind of summarize, setting those expectations early on, working together as a team, building that team, builder, architect, homeowner, including architect/designer, that team is going to be critical through all those decisions, and they need to be involved with each other from a very early age. That's the icy leaves blowing against the garage door.
Oh, that's okay. But going back to that, when you start thinking about the expectation too, as you break this down, and here's the value to that. As you break this down, and even though we say, okay, at 3 months, we have 5 months of the heavy lifting, that is broken down, right? We're going to start with maybe the kitchen, then we're going to start with the master suite. And so we have timelines. We also have the structural components when they're going to review and make sure everything's going to jive together. So the clients still have this mapped out, because the goal is that they know exactly what's going to be happening for this next year.
Right.
And when they understand that's great. And here's the value too. When the client calls and says, and we just had this recently, really, we're going to be 3 years till we're into our house. Well, we got 2 kids in high school. One's a sophomore, one's a junior. Well, we better think about our design now, because they're going to be out of the house. Right. And so that's where it impacts too, because by setting that clear expectation, now we're designing the house for when they're going to be visiting in college, or maybe future, married and have grandkids.
Right.
Or maybe they're young kids like you have right now that, hey, in a few years, they're all going to be in school. They're older. I don't need maybe a toy room. Maybe I need like a teen room. And so it just caters as you set that expectation, and it just helps with the overall project.
That's cool. Brad, I appreciate you sticking around on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
AFT underscore construction.
So yeah, it's AFT underscore construction on Instagram, websites, aftconstruction.com. If you
got a podcast too.
Podcast, AFT Construction Podcast, and then on all the podcast channels, and then Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest. It's all AFT Construction, so all pretty easy.
Cool. Let's go get some lunch.
I'm hungry.
All right. Guys, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the NS Podcast. Stay tuned for an episode of Site Visit as well as Revealed. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by Reno Run. If you guys want more information on that, podcast.renorun.ns. We'll see you guys next week.